Mr. Zhivago, Good Expectations. So I contributed a couple of these, Portrait of a Woman, for example, Henry James, and Hitch 22. I thought I may need that one day.
I think on that note, we will ask, is there any way of the lights being put up so that we can ask?
I don't know if I want to see them.
Gosh, wow.
Oh.
We haven't been able to see any of this. I can half see you, sir, there.
Your lapel badge, I can't see from here what it is. Could you tell us what it is and why it's significant to you?
It's the flag of Kurdistan. And the Kurdish people, as you may know, numbering between 40 and 45 million people, are the largest nation in the world without a state. And they live in a very unpromising area, roughly where the borders of Iran, Iraq, Turkey, and Syria meet, which is not where you perhaps would want to pitch your tent if you hope to be an independent and free people, but they've been fighting for their liberty and recognition for a very long time. And when I was young, it was a solid cause of the left, and some of you will know, well, you all better know, that they were subjected to a very thoroughgoing experiment in chemical and biological warfare a few years ago, and were driven into a state of utter desolation. And now, well, one of the biggest success stories of liberated Iraq, and in the northeastern three provinces of Iraq have, by the Iraqi constitution, their own independence, their own autonomy, their own parliament, and the right to strike bargains with other countries, to have an airport that receives flights direct from other countries, and so forth. It's the nearest they've ever got to having a free state. And in case you wonder, I'm on their side. And I think they need their friends. They also know who their friends are. They remember all those who filled the streets trying to keep Saddam Hussein in power.
There's a gentleman on the other side, sir. This chap here, yeah.
Good evening. In my opinion, you've made some valid criticisms on the influence of God and religion upon our society.
Thank you.
However, do you acknowledge that some notion of spirituality is pertinent to maintain a humility and perspective of our own existence, which does not necessarily depend on a notion of a God or a deity?
I had the experience last evening, of going in to hear evensong at the cathedral in Hereford. And just as the bells finished tolling, got there just in time for the start of the prebendal singers, and ran into Anthony Grayling on the way out, who, before I could say to him, "What are you doing here?" said, "Christopher, Hitch, what the hell?" And I said, no, I wouldn't miss it. And I'm glad I was there, by the way, because if it wasn't for me and a couple of old ladies in motorized chariots, the choir, the prebendal choir, would be singing to an empty nave, which I think would have been a shame. And George Herbert, who I think is probably the greatest, along with John Donne, the greatest English religious writer and poet, was at Hereford. And Lawrence Traherne was at a parish, actually had the living of a parish just down the road. And you wouldn't want to and couldn't possibly be without that tradition. You'd lose a lot of your sense of moral proportion, I think. So the great cultural question to me is not how to reject religion, because that's easy enough to do, but how to transcend it, how to make something out of the extraordinary architecture, poetry, music, and painting that it's produced. I give the example, because it's not an English or a Christian one, or a monotheistic one at all, of the Parthenon, about which I wrote a book. If the Parthenon was to be destroyed, I don't know how one would go on contemplating things. It would be a loss greater than perhaps that of a friend almost, or a relative. And its existence, and indeed its restoration, means a great deal to me, and I've written a lot about it. But I have no interest at all in the cult of Pallas Athena, or the worship of her, or in the Eleusinian mysteries and that cult, or in fact in Athenian imperialism and the Melian expedition, about which Sir Peter knows a lot more than I do. But, so the cultural question is, how does one preserve, appreciate, enhance the symmetry and beauty of the Parthenon, while discarding superstition and the supernatural. And I believe that's a cultural task that everyone has something to contribute to.
Thank you.
I mean to say, sorry, to which everyone has something to contribute. Sorry.
Thank you. There's a gentleman there I can see, yes.
You actively pursued Henry Kissinger and wanted to see him brought to trial as a war criminal. Unfortunately, that's something I support. Unfortunately, it was a little bit derailed by obviously what happened at 9/11. I wonder what your thoughts are now about that, and whether you actually think you'll ever get him.
Well, it hasn't been totally derailed by 9/11. If you read the Washington Post on the 11th of September, 2001, the front page headline was that Kissinger had been sued, had been given leave to be sued in a federal court in Washington, D.C., where the family of a Chilean general who'd been murdered on his orders had brought a case in their own justification. This case did, alas, somewhat fizzle out, it's true, but we did get that far, and it's on the record. He was visited by the magistrates in Paris, just as my book came out in French, by Judge Roger Leloir, a very courageous magistrate, and detained briefly at the Hotel Ritz before skipping town. He doesn't travel now without lawyers or travel without legal advice. He's been asked by judges in Chile and Argentina, Judge Rodolfo Corral, who did the great investigation of the death squads of Argentina, and the judge in Chile who ran the Pinochet case, to appear for questioning, and has refused to do so. So he's somewhat been circumscribed in point of his movements, and very much, I think, in point of his reputation. And his obituaries won't be quite the same. Though if he dies